They told Elira that the man in the North Tower was already dead. That was the first lie she was ever told inside the walls of Val Keep, and before the winter was out she would learn that it was also the kindest one. The healers said it in low voices, the way people speak of weather that has already ruined the harvest. The Lycan king is gone. His body still breathes, but the wolf inside him has stopped answering. When a Lycan's wolf goes silent, they murmured, the man does not last the night, and so they had stopped climbing the stairs. They had stopped changing the linens. They left a single candle burning at his door out of habit, the way a household leaves a lamp lit for a traveler who is never coming home. Elira, in those days, was nobody. A bondservant with cold hands and a debt she had not chosen, sold into the mountain court to pay for a father's foolishness and a mother's grave. She carried water. She scrubbed the great cauldrons until her knuckles split and wept a little blood into the wash water. She had learned the trick of moving through a crowded hall without ever being seen, because a girl who is never seen is a girl who is never struck, and she had learned that lesson early and paid full price for it. She was 17 when they brought her up the mountain in a cart with 3 other debtors, and she was 19 now, and in the 2 years between, she had made herself so small and so quiet that whole days went by in which no one in Val Keep spoke her name at all. She was not supposed to be in the North Tower that night. She would have liked to tell herself it was courage that took her up those stairs. It would have made a prettier story, but it was cold, plain and simple. The servants' quarters had gone to ice. The fire in the lower kitchen had been let die to save the wood, and the head cook had boxed her ear for asking after more logs as though she had asked for the moon on a silver chain. So she took a stub of candle from the chapel where no one prayed anymore, and she climbed, because the towers held the last warmth in the whole dead keep, and because no one on earth would think to look for a shivering girl in a room where a king was busy dying. The stair was long. It wound up through the old black stone like a throat, and the wind found every crack in it and made a sound she would never forget as long as she lived. A low, mourning note, almost a howl, as if the mountain itself grieved the man at the top of it. She counted the steps to keep from being afraid. 91. She never forgot the number afterward. 91 steps between the life she had and the life that was coming for her, and she climbed every one of them thinking only of getting warm, her breath smoking in the dark, her candle throwing a small trembling coin of gold onto walls that had not felt a servant's hand in days. The door at the top stood ajar. The candle the servants had left there had guttered down to a cold puddle of tallow, and there, in the gray light of a dying moon that leaned through one high window, Elira saw the king of the Lycans for the first time. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. Caelan Draven, the Ironmark king, the wolf who had held the northern passes against 3 invasions and never once knelt. They said he was 7 feet of muscle and menace. They said his eyes burned amber like a banked fire, and that men had fainted simply from being looked at across a war table. They said his roar could crack green wood and turn a whole battlefield to a rout. In the songs the minstrels sang in warmer halls than this one, he was a mountain that walked. The man on the bed was none of those things. He was still huge, even wasted and gray. He filled the great carved bed the way a fallen tree fills a clearing. Dark hair, matted now, spilled across a pillow that had not been changed in days. A black beard, tangled and dull. His chest, bare above the furs, was a map of old wars, scars ridged like mountain ranges, one of them fresh and angry and wrong-colored, weeping at the edges where the healers had given up and turned away. But it was his face that stopped Elira in the doorway with the candle shaking in her fist. He looked like a man being pulled underwater. His skin had gone the color of ash, and his lips were faintly blue, and his breath came in long, dragging pulls with terrible silences between them, silences that stretched until she found herself counting again, the way she had counted the stairs, willing the next breath to come. Sometimes it did not come for so long that she was certain she was watching a man die in front of her, and then his chest would heave, and the awful rattle would begin again, and she would find she had been breathing along with him without meaning to, as though her own small lungs could lend him something. She should have left. A wise girl leaves. A wise girl does not linger in a dead king's chamber where, if he woke, he might tear her in half before he knew his own name. For a wounded Lycan is a mad thing. Everyone knew that too. Everyone had heard the stories of the fever turns that ended with a healer's throat in a wolf's jaws. A wise girl thinks of her own skin, of of the 91 stairs back down to a corner she could still call hers. But Elira had never been wise. She had only ever been stubborn, which is a poorer cousin of courage, and had gotten her into every trouble she had ever known. And there was something in the way he lay there, abandoned, with his one guttering candle and his unchanged sheets, something that reached into the oldest, coldest room inside her and turned a key. She knew what it was to be left to die, because keeping you alive had become inconvenient. She knew it in her bones, in the marrow of them. She had watched her mother cough herself gray in a cottage no lord would send a healer to, because a peasant's breath was not worth the walk. So instead of leaving, she crossed the room. She set her stub of candle beside his dead one. She looked down at the most feared man in the north, and she did the small, foolish, human thing that no healer in that whole keep had bothered to do in 3 days. She reached out and touched his forehead to feel his fever. His skin was not hot. It was cold. Cold as the stone, cold as the wind in the stair, and that frightened her more than any fever would have, because she had nursed her mother through her last winter, and she knew that a body going cold from the inside is a body letting go. Whatever fire a Lycan was born carrying, his had gone out, and he was freezing to death inside his own skin in a room full of furs, alone, 3 floors above a keep that had already begun to speak of him in the past tense. "You're cold," she said stupidly, out loud, to a dying king. Her voice sounded very small in that great stone room. "You great fool, you're freezing." And she did the next foolish thing. She built up his fire. There was wood, good dry oak, split and stacked and forgotten, more wood in that one hearth than the servants had been allowed in a month, and something in her went hot with anger at the waste of it, at the whole rotten arrangement of the world in which a dying man who could not lift his hand had a stack of seasoned oak he could not burn, while a living girl 3 floors down had frozen with none. She laid the fire the way her mother had taught her, kindling crossed just so, and she coaxed it up out of the banked coals with her breath and her patience, and she fed it until it roared, a small roar, a hearth roar, but it filled the room with gold, and she felt the cold begin, grudgingly, to give ground. Then Elira climbed onto that enormous bed beside the king of the Lycans, because warmth is warmth and a body is a body, and she had nothing else in the whole world to give him, and she pressed herself against his cold side and pulled the furs up over them both, and she told herself she was only being practical. She told herself she was only borrowing a little of the warmth she was making. She told herself a great many things, lying there in the dark with her heart going hard, and not one of them was the truth, and the truth was only this: she could not bear to let a thing die alone if her staying might keep it company to the end. She lay there a long time, listening to those terrible gaps between his breaths. And then, sometime in the deepest part of the night, the gaps stopped ending. She felt it before she understood it. The slow rise of his chest under her arms simply did not come. She waited. She counted. 10, 20, 30. His body had gone still in a way that stillness before had not been, a final stillness, a stillness with nothing waiting on the other side of it. The rattle did not start again. The fire cracked and settled in the grate, and Elira understood, with a lurch of the whole world, that the Lycan king had stopped breathing against her side, and that no one in all that keep knew it or would care until morning, and that she was, in that single moment, the only living soul who had witnessed the death of a king. She did not know, even long afterward, why she did what she did next. She turned it over 10,000 times in the years that followed. She was a servant. He was nothing to her. His death changed nothing in her life except perhaps to free up a tower room for her to freeze in. Any sensible creature would have climbed down, gone back to her cold corner, and said nothing to anyone. Instead she sat up, and she put both her hands on that great cold chest, and she did the thing a traveling healer had taught her the winter her mother's heart had stopped once and started again. She pressed down, hard, with the heels of both hands, over and over, the way the old woman had shown her, counting under her breath. And when that did nothing, when he lay gray and gone beneath her, she did the last thing, the thing that would one day give this whole story its name. She tilted his heavy head back, she pinched his nose shut, and she sealed her mouth over the mouth of the dead king of the Lycans and breathed her own living breath down into him, as hard as she could, as though she could push her own stubbornness into his lungs and light again the fire that had gone out. She breathed for him, once, twice, She pressed his chest until she felt something shift beneath the heel of her hand. She breathed again. She was weeping now, though she could not have told anyone why. Weeping for a man she had never met, cursing him between breaths. Don't you dare. Don't you dare. Not like this. Not left up here like something thrown away. Breathe, you stubborn thing. Breathe for me. And the king of the Lycans breathed. He drew air with a sound like a drowning man breaking the surface of a black lake, a great ragged whooping gasp that arched his whole body up off the bed, and his eyes flew open, and they were not the eyes of a dying man. They were amber and blazing, lit from within like coals blown to sudden life, and they fixed on her from a hand's breadth away, her mouth still half over his, her tears still falling onto his face, her hands still flat on his chest, and she felt the change roll through him all at once. She felt the cold body under her palms flood with a heat so sudden and so fierce it was like laying bare hands on a forge. His heart slammed once, twice, a war drum coming awake beneath her fingers. The wolf that had gone silent, the wolf everyone in that keep had sworn was gone forever, the wolf answered. And it answered because of her. She knew that later. She did not know it then. Then she only knew that a dead man had come alive under her hands with his golden eyes an inch from hers, and that a low sound had begun in his chest, a sound she felt through her palms before she heard it with her ears, a growl that rose and rose until the very stones of the tower seemed to hum along with it. She tried to pull back. Of course she tried to pull back. Every animal instinct she owned was screaming at her to go down the stairs and out into the clean cold snow. But his hand came up, faster than a dying man had any right to move, faster than anything she had ever seen a body do, and closed around her wrist. Not crushing, not yet, just closing, a manacle of warm iron, holding her exactly where she was. And Kaelin Draven, king of the Lycans, back from the far side of death with her breath still in his lungs, looked up into her face with those burning eyes, and dragged in one more enormous breath, and used it to roar a single word that shook dust down from the rafters and stopped her own heart where his had just restarted. Mine. The word hit her like an open hand against the chest. It was not a question. It was not even, quite, a word. It was something older than words, something that came up out of the wolf and not the man, a claiming and a promise and a threat, all folded into one syllable that rang off the stone and rolled back over the two of them. Mine. The candles guttered. The fire flared and leaned, and somewhere far below in the sleeping keep, she would learn this only later, every Lycan in Val Keep sat bolt upright in the dark, because their king's voice had come back from the dead, and it had come back roaring one word, and the whole pack heard it and understood, before she did, exactly what it meant. Illyra did not understand. She only knew she was caught. "Let go," she whispered. Her voice had almost nothing left in it. "Please, my lord, my king, please, You were dying. I only meant to." "You," he said, and it was a different voice now, lower, rougher, a voice that had not been used in days and had just been spent roaring down the ceiling. His amber eyes moved over her face like hands, like he was learning her, memorizing her, and there was a bewilderment in them under all that fire, a lost look, the look of a man who has been somewhere terrible and clawed his way back and does not yet understand what he has come back to. "You brought me back." "I didn't mean—" "You brought me back." His grip on her wrist gentled, and his other hand rose, shaking, and the backs of his blunt fingers brushed the tears on her cheek as though he could not quite believe they were real, as though he were not sure whether she or he was the ghost in that room. "I was in the cold place. There is a cold place, servant, at the bottom of everything, and I was in it, and it was done. I was letting go. And then there was warmth. There was a voice. Someone cursed me. A sound that might, in a living man, have been the ghost of a laugh. Someone called me a stubborn thing, and breathed fire back into my lungs." "That was you. That was me," she admitted, because there seemed no use lying to a man who could surely hear the hammer of her heart. "I'm sorry. I'll go. I'll never speak of it to a soul. Only please let me go, my lord. I'm nobody. I'm not supposed to be here at all." His hand closed again, gentle but absolute. "No," said the king of the Lycans. And he rose. Illyra had seen strong men rise from sickbeds before, slowly, gathering themselves, testing their legs against the floor. Kaelin Draven did not rise like a sick man. He rose like a tide coming in. One moment he was flat on the bed with death still gray at the edges of him, and the next he had gathered his enormous frame upright, the furs falling away, and she understood for the first time the true size of the thing she had climbed into bed beside. He was a wall. He was a mountain that walked, exactly as the songs had said, and he swayed with weakness even as he stood, and still he was the most overwhelming thing she had ever been near in her life, and his hand had never once let go of her wrist. He was between her and the door before she understood he had moved. And then, she would never forget it as long as she lived, he reached out with his free hand and turned the great iron key in the lock of the chamber door, and the bolt shot home with a sound like a sentence being passed. And he pulled the key loose and closed his fist around it, and he turned back to her in the leaping firelight, swaying, burning, alive, and he said the second thing that would shape the rest of her life. No one is taking you back down those stairs. Not the cook who blackened your ear. Yes, I can smell it on you. I can smell all of it, the cold and the water and the fear worn into you like a second skin. Not the healers who left me to die. Not the whole rotten court below us. You climbed into a dead man's room to steal a little warmth, and instead you gave a king his life. Do you understand what you have done, girl? Do you understand what you are now? No, she whispered. It was the truest thing she said all that long night. Neither do I, entirely, he admitted. And there it was again, that bewilderment under the fire, that lost thing that made him, for the space of one heartbeat, not a king or a monster, but only a man who had died, and come back, and found the whole world rearranged around him. But the wolf knows. The wolf has known since your breath hit its lungs. It will not be argued with. It has been trying to die for 3 days, servant, and one lungful of you was worth more than 3 days of healers. Mine. It keeps saying it. Mine. His thumb moved, once, over the frantic pulse in her wrist. I do not yet know what it means. But I know I am not opening that door until I do. The fire roared. The wind mourned in the stair, and Elira stood locked in a tower with the king of the Lycans, her breath in his lungs and his hand around her wrist, at the very beginning of the winter that would change everything she was. That was where the story truly started, not with a dying king, with a locked door, and a claiming word, and 2 people on either side of it who did not yet know they had already stopped being who they were. The first thing anyone must understand about that night is that Elira did not believe him. Not the wolf, not the claiming, none of it. She was a servant, and servants learn young that when a powerful man says a strange, warm, impossible thing to you in the dark, it is not a gift. It is a trap, dressed as a gift, and the price always comes later, and the price is always higher than you can pay. So when Kaelin Draven stood swaying between her and the locked door and told her she was his, some cold, wise, wounded part of Elira simply folded its arms and settled in to wait for the real intention to show its face. It would show. They always showed. She had only to be patient and keep her back to no walls she could not see. You're weak, she said. She heard her own voice come out steady and practical, and she was proud of it, absurdly proud, the way you are proud of a small competence in a moment far too large for you. My lord, you've been 3 days dying. Whatever the wolf is telling you, your body is telling the truth, and your body is about to fall down. If you drop in this state, you may not get up again, and then I will have breathed for you for nothing. Sit, please. Before you undo all my work in the space of a boast. Something flickered across that fierce gray face. Surprise, she thought. She did not imagine many people in 30 years had told the Ironmark King to sit down and stop being a fool. And then, grudgingly, swaying, one hand going out to the bedpost, he sat, lowering himself back to the edge of the great bed, and the effort of even that much cost him. She saw the tremor go through his arms, saw the gray come creeping back into the little gold his skin had won. He had been right that the wolf had answered. But a wolf is not a whole body, and the body was still half in the grave, and Elira knew the difference, the way she knew the weight of a full water yoke on her shoulders. There, she said, and some instinct older than fear took over, the nursing instinct, the one her mother had left her like an inheritance in place of coin. She pulled the furs back up around those enormous shoulders. She found the water jug the healers had left, and finding it foul with 3 days standing, she would not give it to him. Instead, she set the small kettle at the fire's edge, and she broke the skin of ice on the ewer by the window, and she began, out of long habit, the patient work of keeping a sick man alive. You'll drink when it's boiled and cooled. You'll eat if there is anything in this tomb worth eating. And you will stop roaring, because every breath you spend roaring is a breath you do not have to spare, and I did not give you mine to have you throw it at the ceiling. You give orders, he observed, from the bed, to a king. I give orders to a patient. She did not look at him. It was easier not to look at him. Kings I've no experience of. Dying men I know well. Lie back. He was quiet a moment. The fire snapped. When he spoke again, the roar had gone entirely out of his voice, and what was left was low and strange and searching, a voice reaching in the dark for something it had never held. What is your name? She almost did not tell him. A name is a handle. Give a powerful man your name, and you have given him a thing to pick you up by. But he already had her breath in his lungs, which is a far more intimate thing than a name, so it seemed foolish to hoard the smaller secret when the larger one was already spent. Elira, she said. Elira. He said it slowly, turning it over in his mouth, and something in the wolf-gold eyes settled when he said it, the way a restless dog settles when it finally hears the one word it has been waiting all night to hear. Elira, who owns your debt? The question caught her off her guard. The court holds it. The steward, Merrick, keeps the ledger. My father borrowed against a harvest that failed, and then my father died, and the debt did not, and so She stopped. She did not tell her history to people. She did not know why she was telling it to him. It doesn't matter, it's a small debt. It only feels large from where I stand. How large? 80 silver crowns. The number that had eaten her whole life. With the interest Merrick adds to it each year, it does not shrink no matter how I scrub. I will die owing it. Servants like me always do. That is how the ledger is built. It is not meant to be paid off. It is meant to be inherited by whoever is fool enough to survive you. She heard the bitterness leak into her voice and clamped down on it hard. Bitterness is a luxury. It gets servants whipped. Forgive me, that is far more than you asked. The king of the Lycans looked at her for a long moment across the firelit room. And then he laughed, a real laugh this time, rusty and broken and astonished. A laugh that turned at once into a cough that bent him double over his poisoned chest. And she crossed the room without thinking, and put her hand flat on his back until the fit passed. And when he straightened, there were tears of exertion standing in his eyes, and something else, something worse, something that looked terribly like wonder. 80 silver crowns, he said. Elira, do you know what I would have paid, an hour ago, for one more breath? Do you know what a single breath is worth to a man in the cold place at the bottom of everything? He caught her hand where it rested on his shoulder. She had forgotten it was there, and he held it, huge and warm, between both of his own. You gave me a whole life's worth of breaths for free, and you are worried about 80 crowns of a dead man's debt. No, that ledger is finished. I'll burn the page myself, with my own hand, the moment I can climb the stairs to reach it. That is the smallest thing I will do for you, Elira, and we both already know it. You don't owe me anything, she said, and she pulled her hand back, and she was frightened now in a new way, not of his strength but of his gratitude, because gratitude from the powerful is the most dangerous debt of all. It curdles, it sours, it comes in time to resent the one it cannot repay. She had seen it happen to better girls than herself. I did what any decent person would have done. You'd have done the same in my place. No, said Kaelin Draven, very simply, and the plain honesty of it stopped her cold. I would not have. That is the difference between us, and it is why the wolf has chosen, and it is why I will spend a long time learning to deserve what you did. I have let men die for less than the inconvenience of climbing a stair. I have been the cold at the bottom of other people's stories. And a servant girl I had never met climbed 91 steps in the dark and gave her own breath to keep a stranger's heart beating, and asked for nothing, and is now standing in my tower trying to give me back to a court that left me to rot. Do not tell me I would have done the same. We both know what I am. The wonder of this whole night is what you are. She had no answer to that. There is no answer to that. So she did the only thing she knew how to do in the presence of something too large to hold. She went back to work. She tested the kettle with the back of her wrist. She found, in a cabinet the healers had ignored, a heel of hard bread and a wedge of harder cheese, and she softened the bread in the warmed water, and she fed the king of the Lycans from her own hand, a little at a time, the way you feed someone who has forgotten how. And he let her, this mountain of a man. He opened his mouth and let a servant feed him softened bread, and he watched her face the whole time with those burning golden eyes, as though she were the only fire in the room, warmer than the one in the grate. And that was how the longest night of Elira's life passed, not in claiming or roaring in the end, but in the small quiet work of keeping a man alive. A kettle, a heel of bread, a hand on a shaking back, a fire fed log by log against the morning wind. By the time the gray came up in the one high window, Kalen Draven was sleeping again, but it was true sleep now, deep and even, the awful gaps gone out of his breathing, and Elira sat beside him in the ashes of the great fire, with his hand still closed loosely around her wrist even in his sleep, unwilling even unconscious to let go of the thing that had pulled him back, and she thought, in the morning he will have forgotten. In the morning he will be a king again, and I will be a debt in a ledger, and this whole night will be a strange dream we both silently agree never to have had. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about nearly everything, that winter. But she did not know it yet, and so she let herself sleep, there in the hard chair, with a king's hand around her wrist, and the fire dying down to red coals, and for the first time since they had sold her into the mountain, she was warm all the way through to the center of her. He had not forgotten. That was the first surprise of the morning. Elira woke to gray light and the smell of the cold hearth and the deep wrongness of a room that was not her corner of the servants' cellar, and for one plunging moment she did not know where she was or what she had done. Then she felt the warm weight around her wrist, and she turned her head, and the king of the Lycans was awake and watching her, propped up against the carved headboard with color come back into his face, and the furs pooled at his waist. And he had been watching her sleep, she understood, for some time. "You're still here," he said. There was something raw in it, as if he had genuinely expected to wake and find the whole night had been a fever's invention, and himself alone. "You had my wrist," she pointed out. It seemed rude to gnaw it off to get free. The laugh again. Stronger this morning, no cough chasing the end of it. He let go of her wrist at once, deliberately, opening his great hand and drawing it back as though to prove that he could, as though to prove she was not a prisoner after all, and the loss of that warmth was so immediate and so strange that she had to stop herself from reaching after it like a fool. "There," he said, watching her face closely. "You are free to walk out that door, Elira. I unlocked it an hour ago, while you slept. I want you to know that you can go, before I say anything else to you. The wolf does not get to make a cage of you. If you walk down those stairs and never come back, I will burn your debt anyway and send silver after you down the mountain and never trouble your life again as long as I live. That is a promise, and I do not break them. Do you believe me?" She looked at the door. It stood unlocked, just as he had said, a hand's width of gray morning showing at its edge. 91 steps down and she could be back in her life, her small, safe, invisible life, her cold corner and her split knuckles, and her 80 crowns of inherited debt. Everything she knew in the world was down those stairs. She did not move toward the door. She asked herself many times, in the years after, whether it was the wolf reaching for her, some pull she did not have the words for. She never thought it was. She thought it was simpler and more human than that. She thought it was that a man had just handed her the key to her own cage and told her to go, and in 19 years of being owned, no one had ever once let her choose anything at all. And a choice, when you have never once been given one, is the most binding thing in the whole world. He unlocked the door, and that was precisely why she stayed. "I believe you," she said, "and I'm not going, not because of any wolf, because you'll be dead again by nightfall if someone doesn't make you drink and keep that wound clean. And I have decided I did not climb 91 stairs to watch you rot from a hurt the healers were too cowardly to touch. That's all it is. It isn't the thing you said last night. I don't know anything about that, but I never in my life left a job half finished, and I'll not start with a king." "A job half finished," he repeated gravely, and she saw he was fighting down a smile, and she saw too that he understood exactly what she was doing, giving them both a smaller, safer word to stand on than the one he had roared in the dark, and that he was letting her do it, which was its own kind of gift, the first he ever gave her that she recognized as one. "Very well, then stay and finish your job, Elira, but understand that the moment you stepped back from that open door of your own will, you made a liar of anyone downstairs who tells you what you are. You are not a debt this morning. You are the woman who chose to stay in the Lycan King's tower. The court will find that a great deal more troublesome than 80 crowns. I want you to go down those stairs with your eyes open." She did not fully understand him then. She understood him by nightfall. Because the keep, of course, found out. It began with the guard on the stair. Kaelin sent her down, insisted on it, over her protests that he would fall out of the bed the moment she turned her back, to fetch clean water, real food, and the captain of his guard, a grizzled old Lycan named Torv, who had served the king's father before him, and the king himself since he was a boy. So Elira went down the 91 stairs into a keep that did not yet know its king had come back from the dead, and she watched the news travel ahead of her like fire licking through dry summer grass. The first man she passed on the stair went still as carved stone. Lycans smell things that human folk cannot. He took one breath of her as she edged past, and his eyes went wide, and his hand went to his own heart, and he said, in a voice full of wonder and fear tangled together, "You've been with the king. His scent is all through you. Living scent. He's alive? The king is alive?" And before she could shape an answer, he was gone, running, roaring the news down through the tower stair, and by the time Elira reached the great hall, the whole keep was coming awake around her in an uproar, doors banging, boots on stone, and every Lycan in it turned to look at her, the servant, the debt, the invisible girl, because she walked in a cloud of their king's living scent, and she was, suddenly and completely, the most important person in Val Keep. She had spent her whole life learning how not to be seen. It is a terrible thing, she discovered, to be suddenly and completely visible. It is like being stripped in a crowd. Every eye found her and held her and weighed her, and she wanted more than anything in the world to shrink back down into the furniture and disappear, and she could not, because the furniture had spoken and could not be unspoken. Torv found her before she found him. He was a great slab of an old wolf, gray through the beard, one ear notched to a ragged edge by some blade decades gone, and he came through the gathering crowd like a warship through harbor water, and stopped in front of her, and simply breathed, once, deeply, and his hard old face cracked open with something she had not expected, and did not know how to receive, not suspicion. Not yet, grief lifting off him like fog off a morning field, hope he was plainly afraid to trust. "Say it plain, girl," he said, low, so only she could hear it under the din. "They told me he was 3 days gone. They told me the wolf had left him and would not come back. I've been sitting a death watch on a locked tower for 3 nights, waiting for the healers to find the courage to come down and tell me my king had gone cold. And now here you come out of that tower stinking of him alive. So say it to me plain, and if it's a lie I'll know it, because I'll smell that too, the way I've smelled every lie in this keep for 40 years. "He's alive," Elira said. "He's weak, and the wound is bad, and if the healers who gave up on him come anywhere near him, I think he'll throw them off the tower himself. But he's alive. He woke in the night. He's awake now, giving orders and refusing to rest like a great fool. He wants you. And he wants clean water, and food that isn't 3 days rancid, and he wants it now, and he wants it carried up by hands he can trust, which by his account is a short list, and you are the whole of it." Torv looked at her for a long, long moment, and the whole hall seemed to hold its breath around them. And then the old wolf did a thing that undid Elira completely, that she was in no way prepared for. He went down on one knee, there in the middle of the great hall in front of the whole staring, gasping keep, and he bowed his grizzled gray head to a bondservant in a wet apron with her sleeves still rolled to the elbow, and he said, in a voice like grinding millstones, "Then I owe you a debt I can never pay, and so does every living soul inside these walls, and I'll not forget it if I live another 100 years. Whatever you are to him, girl, and the whole hall can smell what the wolf is saying about you, so let no one here pretend otherwise. You are the reason we still have a king this morning. Command me. Torv of the Ironmark is yours to the grave. There is no way to describe what that is like, if you have always been seen, to go from invisible to knelt to in the space of a single gray morning. It is not the triumph the songs make of it. It is terrifying. It is like being hauled up out of deep water far too fast. Something inside you cannot equalize, cannot keep pace, and the pressure of it makes your ears ring and your vision swim." Elira remembered afterward that she had made him stand. She could not bear to see him kneel. It was obscene to her, a warrior of 60 years going down before a girl who had scrubbed his cauldrons. and she remembered the whole hall watching, and she remembered thinking, even in the middle of it, with a servant's clear cold instinct for danger, not all of these faces are glad. Some of these faces are calculating. Somewhere in this crowd is a man whose careful plans a living king has just ruined, and he is smiling with the rest, and he is the most dangerous person in this room. She was right about that. His name was Steward Merrick, and the man standing at his shoulder was Lord Castellan Vane, and between the two of them they had spent 3 quiet days dividing a dead king's power like men carving a roast, and Alira had just walked into their hall in a wet apron and undivided it, and she had made an enemy of the 2 most dangerous men in the whole mountain before she even learned their names. But that came later. First there was a king to feed, and a fever to burn back, and a wound to clean that the healers had been too frightened to touch, and it was the wound that nearly killed him in the end, and it was not natural, and Alira was the one who found it out. She brought Torv up the 91 stairs with the water and the food and 2 guards he trusted at his back, and while the king spoke with his old captain in that low, rumbling voice, low and fast, of watches and locks and who was to be trusted, Alira quietly unwound the healer's filthy gray dressing from the wound on his chest to clean it, and she stopped, and she went cold, colder than the tower stair had ever made her, because she had nursed enough hurts in her life to know a clean wound from a foul one, and this was neither. The flesh around the gash was black at the edges, and the black had a sheen to it, a faint, oily green sheen that no honest infection ever wears, and when she brought the candle close she could smell, under the ordinary rot, a sweetness that did not belong there at all, a sweetness like crushed almonds and cold iron, thin and wrong. "This wound is poisoned," she said. She said it flatly, into the middle of their low talk, and both men went silent and turned to look at her. "My lord, this isn't a wound gone bad on its own. Someone put something in it, and they have been keeping it there. That is why the wolf could not heal it. That is why you were dying. A Lycan heals a sword cut in a day. Everyone in the north knows that much. So a sword cut that put you 3 days in the grave was never only a sword cut. There is poison in you, and it is silverthorn or something very like it, and it is still in the wound, and if we do not draw it out you will go cold again the very moment I stop feeding you fire." She looked up into his face. "Who gave you this wound, my lord? On the field or after it?" The great grim map of his face went very still, and Torv, the old wolf, leaned in and breathed the wound himself, deep, and his lips peeled back from his teeth in a silent snarl that lifted the hair on Alira's arms, and he said, in a voice like stones dragged over stone, "The girl's right. That's silverthorn, or its cousin. That's a poisoner's work, not a soldier's. My king, you took that wound 8 days ago at the Redfell Pass, and you rode home on it fine. You were on your feet and giving orders for 4 days after. It only turned when you reached home. It only turned inside these walls." He straightened slowly, and his old eyes had gone terrible. "Someone in this keep has been feeding silverthorn into their own king's open wound, night after night, while the healers looked the other way, and called it fate and God's will, and the wolf giving up. This was murder, wearing a battle's clothes." Silence. The fire cracked in the grate, and Alira watched understanding move across Kaelin Draven's face. Not surprise, and that was the very worst of it. Not surprise, but a weary, ancient recognition. The look of a man who has always known his own house was full of knives, and had simply lost track, for one careless moment, of which hand held which blade. "Merrick," he said softly, almost to himself. "Or Vane. Or both. Which is likeliest? They'd have needed the healers bought, and the healers' answer to Merrick's ledger. Every one of them." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again the wolf was in them, gold and cold and very awake. They very nearly did it. 3 days. One more night and it would have been finished, and they would have buried me with all honors and split the mountain between them, and no soul in the north would ever have known it was murder and not a wound taken bravely at Redfell. His gaze came back to Alira, and it changed as it landed on her. It warmed, it did something she did not yet have a name for. And a servant girl came up a cold stair to steal a little warmth, and breathed me back, and then found the poison the whole court had missed or hidden. "Alira, do you begin to see it? The wolf chose better than I ever could have chosen for myself. You are not a job half finished. You are the only clean thing in this whole poisoned house. Draw it out first," she said, because she could not bear the way he was looking at her, because it made something in her chest ache in a way she did not know how to hold, and tell me I'm the clean thing after, if you still want to. Torv, I need a knife heated white in that fire, and honey if there's any left in this keep, and the strongest spirits you can lay hands on, and I need you to hold him, because this is going to hurt him a great deal more than the poison did, and I need him not to throw me across the room when it does." And so, in the grey of that morning, with the old captain's arms locked hard around his king from behind, and the whole keep still in an uproar 3 floors below them, Elira opened the poisoned wound of the king of the Lycans, and drew the black rot out of it, with a heated blade and honey, and her own 2 steady hands, while he gripped the frame of the great bed, until the carved oak cracked and splintered under his fingers, and never once cried out. He watched her do it the whole time with those burning golden eyes, and somewhere in that long red hour she understood, with the same cold clarity that had shown her the poison, that she was not going back down the stairs to her old life. That girl was already gone. That girl had died sometime in the night, breathing fire into a dead man's mouth, and Elira was what had come back in her place. And she did not yet know this new woman well, but she knew already that she was not afraid of very much, and that she was, though she would have denied it with her last breath, beginning to fall. He would not let her go back to the cellar. That was the first argument they had, the first of a great many, for Elira would learn that a life beside Kaelin Draven was a life of arguments, and that this was not a flaw in it but the very heart of it. He had spent 30 years surrounded by people too frightened to tell him no, and a man like that does not need another courtier bowing at his elbow. He needs someone who will plant her feet and say "you great fool," over and over, until at last he laughs instead of striking. But the first argument was about the cellar, and Elira lost it, and losing it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to her. "You'll take the Luna's rooms," he said, on the morning after she drew the poison, when the grey had gone out of his skin at last, and he could sit up unaided and glare at her properly across the chamber. "They adjoin this tower through the old gallery. They have stood empty since my mother died. They are yours." "They're the rooms of a queen," Elira said. "I'm a water carrier. Give me back my pallet in the cellar, and I'll come up the stairs to nurse you morning and night. That is all that's needed. That is all that's proper." "Proper?" He said the word as though it tasted of the very poison she had drawn out of him. "Elira, do you know what was proper this past week? It was proper for the healers to leave their king to die because a steward's ledger paid them better than a king's life did. It was proper for a whole keep to sit a death watch and not one of them climb the 91 stairs to look at me. Propriety in this house has been quietly killing people for years. You'll forgive me if I have lost my taste for it." Then, gentler, watching her the way he always watched her, as if reading a page, "But that is not why you're refusing, is it? You're refusing because a servant knows that the higher you're lifted, the farther you have to fall, and you do not trust the lift. You think if you take the fine rooms and then the fever breaks, they'll turn you out with nothing, and now you'll have farther to fall than when you started. That is the true refusal. That is the fear under the words." She said nothing. He had reached into her and named the exact shape of the fear, and there is nothing in the world more disarming than being understood against your own will by someone you have not given permission to understand you. "So here is what I will do," said the king of the Lycans, "so that you can stop calculating the fall before you've even taken the step. The rooms are yours indeed, witnessed and sealed by Torv and the king's own book steward, not lent but given. Yours, to sell or to keep or to burn to the ground as you please, exactly the way your debt was yours to be free of. If tomorrow you decide you cannot stand the sight of me, you may keep the rooms and lock me out of them, and I will honor the lock. I am not lifting you so that I can hold the lift over your head like every other master you have ever had. I am trying, badly, because I have never once done it before in my life, to give you a piece of ground to stand on that no one can ever take out from under you. Let me, please." A pause, and then, lower. "You gave me my whole life for nothing at all. Let me give you a floor to stand on. It is a very small down payment on a very large debt, and unlike Merrick's ledger, mine is honest, and it will never grow with interest, and no child of yours will ever inherit it, because I intend to spend the rest of my own life failing to pay it off." She took the rooms. What was there to say to that? And so Elira became, in the space of a single week, the strangest thing that Keep had ever housed. Not a servant, not a queen, not a mistress, but a water carrier sleeping in a dead Luna's chambers, with a maid assigned to wait on her who had, 3 days before, outranked her in every way that the keep counted. Her name was Brenna, and she curtsied to Elira each morning with her mouth pressed into a flat white line, and hatred bright and unhidden in her eyes, and she had been, Elira remembered clearly, one of the girls who laughed behind her hand the day the cook boxed Elira's ear over the firewood. Now she had to lace Elira's borrowed gowns and dress Elira's brown hair, and Elira would have liked to say she was gracious about it, that she rose above it like a lady in a song, but the plain truth is that she saw the hatred in Brenna, and something small and mean and long-starved inside her was glad of it, fiercely glad, and she has had to make her peace since with the fact that being lifted up did not make her a better person overnight. It only gave her more room to be a worse one, if she chose. She tried, most days, not to choose it. She did not always succeed, and she has never pretended otherwise. Because that is the part the songs always leave out. They tell you the servant girl was raised up to a queen, and the whole hall wept for joy at the sight of it. They do not tell you that half the hall wept from rage. Elira had risen, and rising is a kind of violence. Every single step up is a step onto ground that someone else was standing on, and they feel the weight of your foot, and they do not forgive it. The noble women of the court had daughters. Those daughters had, every one of them, been raised from the cradle on the settled understanding that one of them might one day be Luna, that the king would take a wife of proper northern blood when at last he was ready, and they had waited, and their mothers had waited longer, and now a water carrier in a dead woman's rooms had reached up in a single dark night and taken the one thing they had all been promised. They smiled at Elira in the galleries. They smiled and smiled and smiled. And Elira had spent her whole life reading the faces of powerful people because her very survival depended on reading them correctly, and she read theirs, and behind every smile was a knife being sharpened slowly on a wet stone, and she understood that Merrick's threat on the stair had been only the first and the crudest of the blades. The court would try subtler poisons than Silverthorn. The subtlest of them all was called Seraphine. She was everything Elira was not, and she made certain from the first that Elira knew it. High-blooded, a lord's daughter of the old northern lines that went back before the keep's own stones, silver fair where Elira was brown, trained from the cradle in every cold art of a court that Elira did not yet understand the shape of. She was beautiful the way a drawn sword is beautiful. You admired it and you did not want to stand too near the edge of it, and she had, until the very week Elira climbed the stairs, been the woman the whole keep quietly assumed the king would one day wed. Not for love. There had never been any question of love where Kaelin was concerned. Everyone knew the Ironmark king did not love, but for alliance, for her father's 500 spears and her family's grain-rich valleys, for all the cold, sensible reasons that kings marry. She had waited for that crown her whole life, patiently, the way a hunter waits, and she came to Elira on the third day in the Luna's rooms, alone, unannounced, and she did not sharpen her knife behind a smile like the others did. She laid it on the table between them in the open, which Elira respected, and which frightened her far more than any smile. "I won't pretend with you," Seraphine said. She sat without being asked, arranging her skirts like a woman who had never in her life waited for permission to do anything. "You're clever. Everyone says so, and I can see it's true, and pretending would only insult us both and waste an afternoon. So here is the plain shape of it. You saved his life, and the wolf is grateful, and gratitude wears the shape of love for a little while, in the beginning, in the firelight. I have seen it happen before. It will not last. And when it thins, and it will thin, water carrier, because a man and a wolf are not the same creature, and the man beneath that wolf has never once loved anything living. I have known him since we were both children, and I am telling you a true thing to your face. When it thins, this keep will still need a Luna who can hold it. Who knows which lord to flatter and which to break before he breaks you? Who can read a treaty by candlelight and command a table of 40 hostile nobles and not be eaten alive before the fish course? That is not you. It cannot be you. You have had a single week of it, and I have had a lifetime. So I am not here to threaten you, Elira. Threats are for the stupid ones. I am here to tell you that when it ends, and you are standing in the wreck of it having reached far too high for a servant's arm, I will not gloat over you. I will simply be there, as I have always been there, ready and willing to do the thing I was raised from birth to do. I can afford to wait for it. That is my whole advantage, and it is a very great one. Can you afford to wait? Or are you living on borrowed firelight? And the terrible thing, the thing that kept Elira awake in the dead Luna's grand cold bed that whole night, was that Seraphine was not entirely wrong. Not about the gratitude. Elira did not yet know, herself, what in Kaelin was gratitude and what was more than gratitude, and she would not let herself believe in the more, because believing in it was the exact fall Seraphine had just described, laid out step by step. But Seraphine was right that Elira could not run a court. She could read a face and draw a poison and lay a fire that would not smoke, but she could not read a treaty, and she had never in her life commanded anything larger than a scrub brush, and if she was going to stand beside Kaelin Draven as anything at all but a fever that would break with the spring, she had a very great deal to learn, and a very short winter in which to learn it, and every soul in that hall was laying quiet bets that she could not. So Elira decided, lying awake in that borrowed bed, to prove every last one of them wrong. Not for the crown, she still did not want the crown frightened her more than Merrick did, but because she had never once in her life been able to bear being told what she could not do. Stubbornness again. Her one true talent, the only inheritance her blood had left her. And she rose the next morning and went to find someone who would teach her. She went to old Torv, and she went to the king's book steward now that Merrick was suspect and barred from the tower, and she asked, plainly, to be taught. Letters she had a little of already. Her mother had taught her the shapes of them before she died. God rest her tired hands. But Elira wanted more than letters. She wanted the treaties and the ledgers and the names of every lord in the north, and what each of them wanted, and what each of them feared in the dark. She wanted to understand the whole machine of the keep from the inside out, the way she had once come to understand the machine of the kitchens, every pot and every grudge and every hidden waste. And she found, to her own surprise, that the same skill which had kept her alive as a servant, watching, listening, reading the true want that hides behind the spoken word, was the whole of statecraft after all, only played for higher stakes and in finer clothes. A court, she came to see, is only a kitchen with better linen and worse tempers. And she knew kitchens. She had survived kitchens. So she set about learning courts the same way, and she learned them fast, because she had to, because there was no one coming to save her if she did not. Kaelin watched her do it, and something in him that she did not understand until much later began, quietly, in the long firelit evenings, to come apart at its old seams and put itself back together in a wholly new shape. Because here is the thing Elira learned about the king of the Lycans in those recovering days, the thing Seraphine had said in passing, and the thing that turned out to be the one key that fit the whole locked man. It was true that he had never loved anything. Seraphine had not said it to wound her. She had said it because it was the great central fact of Kaelin's whole life. His mother had died when he was a boy of 8, the Luna whose rooms Elira now slept in, whose combs still lay in the dressing table, and whose small green slippers still waited in the press. And his father had raised him afterward the way a smith forges a blade, by heating and beating, on the settled theory that a king who felt things could be ruled by them, and a king who felt nothing could not be ruled by anyone at all. And it had worked. Kaelin Draven had become exactly the weapon his father had wanted. A king who held the passes and never knelt and never wept and never, in 30 long years, let a single living soul close enough to cost him anything if they were lost. The pack feared him, the enemy feared him worse. He was the cold at the bottom of other people's stories. He had told Elira that himself the very first night, and he had said it as a confession, but it was also, she came slowly to understand, a wound. The deepest one on all that scarred body, the one no healer could ever find because it did not bleed where a knife could reach it. The one that had, in the end, actually let the poison do its work. Because a Lycan's wolf heals the body, yes, but the wolf draws its true strength from the pack bond, from love given freely and love returned, from the warm invisible threads that tie a wolf to the ones it would die for. And a king who has spent 30 years letting no one at all come close has a wolf that is terribly strong in battle and quietly starving in every other way there is. When the Silverthorn went into Kaelin at Redfell, the wound should have closed within the day, and it had not. And the healers blamed the poison, and the poison was real, but the poison was only half of the killing. The other half was this. When Kaelin Draven lay dying in that cold tower, there was no living soul in all the world that he loved, and no living soul who truly loved him past duty and fear. and so his wolf had nothing at all to hold on to in the dark, nothing to claw its way back toward, and it had simply begun, quietly, to let go of a life that had never once been warm. He had told Elira there was a cold place at the bottom of everything. What he had not understood, until a servant girl breathed her own fire into his mouth, was that he had been living in that cold place for 30 years. The poison had only, at last, made it visible. And then she came. A stranger with no reason on earth to love him and no gain to make from his living, who climbed a stair only for a little warmth and stayed to save a life, who gave him her own breath out of her own lungs and asked him for nothing in return. And the wolf, starving for 30 years, had tasted that one lungful of freely given life and seized it with everything it had left. Mine. It had not been lust, and it had not been only gratitude. It had been a drowning thing grabbing the first rope that had ever, in its whole life, been thrown to it. That was the claiming. That was the whole of it, laid bare. The wolf had been dying not of poison but of a loveless life, and Elira had, without ever knowing what she did, thrown it a rope in the dark. She did not understand all of this at once, of course. She pieced it together slowly over the recovering days, from Torv, who loved his king like a son and grieved the cruel making of him, from the empty rooms of the dead Luna, where she found the woman's things and understood at last the shape of the boy who had lost her, and from Kaelin himself, in the long firelit evenings when Elira made him rest and he, having nothing else in the world to do but heal, began, haltingly, clumsily, to talk. He had never talked to anyone. He did not know how it was done. He would say one true thing about himself and then flinch back from it. Actually flinch. This mountain of a man, his shoulders tensing as though he expected to be struck for having had a feeling out loud in front of a witness. And Elira understood that too, because she had flinched exactly like that her whole life, and it takes one to know one across a fire. Two people who had learned young and learned hard that showing what you feel is how you get hurt, sitting on either side of a hearth, slowly and awkwardly deciding to risk it anyway, one small true sentence at a time. That is not the story the songs tell. But it is the truer one, and it was the one Elira lived. There was one evening she remembered above all the others, because it was the evening she stopped lying to herself. He had asked her, roughly, awkwardly, staring into the fire and not at her, about her mother, and she told him. She told him about her mother's chapped clever hands and her long dying and the debt she had left behind her simply by daring to die, and Elira found partway through that she was weeping, and she was ashamed of it, and she turned her face away toward the dark window, the old flinch. Do not let them see it costs you anything. Tears are a weakness they will use. And Kaelin Draven reached across the small space between their two chairs, and with a gentleness that did not belong to a body that size, he turned her face back toward him. Not to stop the weeping, to witness it. Don't, he said, very low, his amber eyes steady on hers in the firelight. Don't turn away from me when it costs you something. I have spent 30 years turning away from every single thing that cost me. It does not make the cost any less, Elira. I have learned that much. Dying. It only makes you carry the whole weight of it alone in the dark. Let me see it. I want to see all of it, even the parts that hurt you. Especially those. Those are the ones no one has ever been allowed to see, and those are the ones I want. And Elira looked into the burning golden eyes of the king of the Lycans, and she understood that this, not the roaring, not the claiming word, not the wolf or the crown or the 91 stairs, this quiet, terrifying willingness to be seen, and to see in return, learned late and clumsily by two people who had both been taught from childhood to hide. This was the thing. This was what she had breathed back to life in that cold tower without knowing it was there to save, and she stopped pretending, to herself, in that hard chair by that warm fire, that what lay between them was only a fever that would break with the thaw. She did not tell him. She was not brave enough for that yet, not nearly. But she stopped lying to herself, and that is where every honest thing begins. There was another night, later, that she also kept. On the first clear night of the waxing moon, when Kaelin was strong enough at last to walk without leaning on the wall and pretending he was not, he took her out. Not down into the keep, where 40 smiling knives waited, but up and out, through a low door in the old gallery she had never noticed, onto the broad, flat stone of the tower's shoulder, open to the whole white world. The moon rode high and enormous over the mountain, and the forest below them lay silver and black and endless, and when she shivered he stood at her back like a wall against the wind, close but not touching, always asking without words, always leaving her the choice. "The pack runs on nights like this," he said quietly, above her. "Down there, under the trees. I have not run with them in a long time, longer than I should admit. A king who lets no one close does not much like to be a wolf among wolves, where the bond runs so near the skin that everyone can feel everyone." He was silent a moment, and she felt some decision move through the great frame behind her. "But I feel it now. The bond. I have never felt it toward one single person in my life, and now it is there, and it is you, and it is so loud that I hardly know how to stand next to you without reaching out. I am telling you this so that you know it, not to hold you. You may do with it what you like, but you should know that when you weep, 3 floors up, I wake. When you were afraid on the servants' stair last week, before you even reached the top of it, I was already on my feet in the dark and I did not know why. That is the bond, Alira. It goes both ways now. It is the truest thing I own, and I did not earn it, and I would not trade it for the mountain." Far below them, under the silver trees, a wolf lifted its voice and sang one long note to the moon, and then another answered it, and then a third, until the whole cold forest rang with it, and Alira stood on the roof of the world with the king of the Lycans warm at her back and understood, with a fear that was almost entirely joy, that she had come to belong to something at last, and that belonging is the most dangerous gift there is, because it can be taken away. Which is, of course, precisely when the court struck. They struck at a feast, which is where courts do their killing when they cannot use knives. Lord Vane arranged it. Alira understood that only later, under the smiling guise of celebrating the king's recovery. A great dinner in the high hall, 40 of the northern nobility and their sharp-eyed wives and their sharper daughters, and at the very center of it, seated at the king's right hand in a borrowed gown that did not quite fit her, and a thin silver circlet she did not know how to wear, a water carrier who 6 days before had been scrubbing the very cauldrons the feast was being cooked in. It was a trap dressed up as an honor, and it was a clever one. They meant to seat her among them and then let her drown in plain sight. To ask her questions she could not possibly answer. To speak lightly of people and places and old treaties she had never once heard named. To make her commit 40 small blunders of fork and phrase and precedence in front of the entire assembled court, so that by the end of the night the story that traveled back down the mountain would not be the servant girl who saved the king, but the servant girl who shamed him at his own table, who could not hold a knife or finish a sentence, who proved by her every awkward gesture that gratitude had made the great iron-marked king a doting fool. And at the far end of the long table, Seraphine would sit lovely and correct and effortless, doing gracefully everything that Alira did wrong, and the contrast between them would make Vane's whole argument for him, without his ever needing to speak a word of it aloud. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It very nearly worked. It began at once. The first course came, and there were 4 forks laid at her place, and Alira did not know the order of them, or which was meant for what. And she saw the woman seated directly across from her, a lord's wife with a mouth like a paper cut, watching her hands with the patient cruelty of a cat crouched at a mouse hole, waiting for her to reach for the wrong one, so that the soft tittering could begin and travel down the table. And Alira felt the old panic climb her throat, the servant's panic, the bone-deep certainty that she did not belong here and was about to be found out and thrown back down where she came from. And for one long moment, the whole bright hall swam in front of her, and she thought, clearly, Seraphine was right after all. I have reached too high. I cannot do this. I should run for the door before they push me through it. And then something in her went cold and clear and still, the way it had gone the night she found the poison in his wound, and she stopped trying to play their game at all. Because she understood, all at once, sitting there with 4 forks and no idea in the world what to do with them, that she had been trying to win a contest she could never win, trying to be a noblewoman, to outnoble the nobles at the one thing they had done every day of their lives, to hide the water carrier and pass as something she was not. And she would always lose that contest. Every time, because they had a lifetime's head start and she had 6 days. Seraphine had told her exactly that, plainly, and Alira had believed her, and in believing her she had already half lost before the soup was poured. But there was another game being played on that long table, an older and a truer one, and it was the only game Alira had ever in her life been good at, and it was this. She knew servants. She knew the kitchens. She knew the people carrying those heavy platters better than any soul seated at that whole shining table, because 6 days ago she had been one of them, invisible among them, and she knew things about that feast that not one single noble in that hall had the eyes to see. So Elira did not reach for a fork. She lifted her head instead, and she looked down the long torchlit table, and she began, quietly at first, and then not quietly at all, to see. "That's Halda's bread," she said. She had not meant to say it aloud. It simply came out of her, into a lull in the talk, and 40 heads turned toward the king's right hand. She flushed to the roots of her hair, but she had started now, so she went on, because stopping halfway would have been worse than never beginning. "The seeded loaf, there, and there. She's the underbaker. She works the night oven because the head baker won't give her the day shift, and she scores the top crust in a 3-cut cross, always, every loaf. It's her own mark. She taught it to me, in the dark, the winter I first came. This is her very best work." She would have been up since the 3rd bell of the morning for a feast of this size, her arms in the dough to the elbow. Elira looked directly at the lord's wife with the paper-cut mouth. "You have eaten her bread at every feast in this hall for 10 years, my lady, and you have never once known her name." "I do. I know all of their names. I know that the boy pouring your wine just now is favoring his left hand, because the under-butler struck it with a ladle this morning for a spilled cup, and I know that the woman who plated your fish so prettily has a daughter home with a fever and came up to work anyway, because a missed day is a docked wage, and a docked wage is a child who does not eat this week. That is what I know. I do not know your forks. I will learn your forks, they are not so very hard, but I know the whole living machine that made this feast, every hand and every hurt and every hunger in it, because I was one of those hands 6 days ago, and I will be able to see this keep, all of it, especially the parts you have all trained yourselves so carefully not to look at, in a way that not one single person at this table can. So you may laugh at my forks if it pleases you. I would laugh at me too. But when you are quite finished laughing, I would ask yourselves this one honest question. Which of us would truly be the more useful thing for a king to have seated at his right hand? A woman who knows which fork to lift with the fish, or a woman who knows exactly where the whole house is quietly bleeding? There was a silence in that hall you could have carved your name into. And into it, from the king's left, came a sound. It was Calin, and he was laughing, not the cruel court laugh, not a laugh at anyone's expense, but a low, helpless, delighted rumble, the laugh of a man watching the exact thing he had hoped for and had not quite dared to expect, unfolding in front of the whole court that had bet against it. He brought his great open hand down flat on the table so that all the goblets jumped and rang, and he said, to the entire staring hall, there it is. Did you all hear it? Did every one of you hear it? I have sat at the head of this table for 30 years and eaten Halda's bread 10,000 times, and I did not know that woman's name until this very moment. My father did not know it. His father before him did not know it. We have ruled this mountain for 100 years without once seeing the hands that fed us at our own tables, and we had the gall to call that ruling. And a water carrier has been Luna in all but name for 6 days, and she already sees my keep more truly and more wholly than my entire court has managed to see it in a lifetime of feasts." He rose to his feet, and the whole hall was forced to rise with him because it must, chairs scraping, and he lifted his heavy cup toward Elira down the length of that long table, in front of Vane, and in front of Seraphine, and in front of every knife-smiling face in all the north. To the woman who knows where the house is bleeding. Teach her your forks if you like, my lords and ladies. I would far sooner all of you learned her eyes. The cups came up. They had to. And they came down again, and Elira sat there burning and steady with her 4 untouched forks, thinking that it was over, that she had won it, that the trap had closed on empty air. It was not over. Courts do not lose gracefully, and Lord Vane had not spent an entire feast and a fortnight's planning on a single course of bread. As the cups came down, Vane leaned forward, smooth as poured oil, and said, mildly, oh so very mildly, with the practiced mildness that always precedes the real cut, "Beautifully said, Majesty, beautifully. And no one at this table doubts the girl's good heart. Her heart is plainly as large as it is common. But a Luna is not only a pair of soft eyes, is she? A Luna holds the keep when the king rides to war. Aluna speaks with his voice to lords who have spilled a great deal of blood over less than a single misplaced word. Compassion is a fine ornament at a feast. But tell us, and now he turned those flat, cold eyes fully upon Elira, and the second jaw of the trap came swinging down. When the Vashael envoys arrive at the first thaw, demanding back the river rights that your king's own great-grandfather signed away in his weakness, and they sit where I am sitting now, and they test the king's new Luna with the old law, to learn whether she is a woman of state or merely a soft heart in a borrowed gown. What precisely will you say to them, girl? Because if you falter there, in front of them, it is not a fork that spills onto the floor, it is the entire northern border. Compassion will not hold a river against men who want it. Do you even know the treaty of which I speak? And there it was, the real killing stroke, the one they had built the whole feast around delivering. A question about a specific, obscure, decades-old treaty that she could not possibly be expected to know, asked in front of every soul in the north, designed so that her ignorance of it would prove, at last and publicly and past all argument, that a servant could not do the hard, cold work of holding a border, that beneath her pretty speech about bleeding houses she was exactly the soft heart Seraphine had named her. The hall leaned in as one body. Vane smiled his mild gray smile. He had her, and he knew that he had her, and Kaelin, she saw it out of the corner of her eye. Kaelin half rose from his chair to answer for her, to throw himself between her and the blade, the way the wolf always wanted to. And Elira reached out and laid her hand flat on his forearm and stopped him, because she had learned one more thing in 6 days beside this man, and it was that being shielded in front of that hall would damn her faster and more surely than any wrong answer ever could. The Vashael River Treaty, Elira said, and her voice did not shake. Signed in the 3rd year of the old king's reign. It ceded the summer fishing of the Allel, downstream of the falls, in exchange for the guaranteed passage of grain over the Vashael Road in famine years. She watched Vane's mild smile stop moving on his face. I know it, my lord, because I read it 4 nights ago, in the archive, by a single candle, after I had nursed the king to sleep, along with every other treaty binding this border, all of them, because I am not a fool, and I knew a night exactly like this one was coming for me, and I would far rather spend my sleep down in the cold archive than be caught out in this hall not knowing where my own house is bleeding, as you so kindly put it earlier. So yes, I know your treaty, and I know one thing about it that you are very much counting on me not to know. She leaned forward now, and she let the water carrier show all the way through, right to the surface, because the water carrier was the sharpest blade she owned. The grain passage clause was never once honored. Not one time. There have been 3 famine years since that treaty was signed, and each of those 3 times the Vashael closed their road and let the north starve behind it, and paid no forfeit at all, because no one at this table ever pressed them for it. It was easier, and it was cheaper, to let a few thousand peasants die quietly than to open an old quarrel with a neighbor over the corpses of people no lord in this hall had ever bothered to name. So when their envoys come to demand the river back at the thaw, I will not falter, Lord Vane. I will welcome them warmly to this hall, and I will lay 3 famine winters of unpaid forfeit on the table beside their demand. Forfeit that by the plain letter of their own treaty they owe this mountain, in grain and in gold, more than the river rights are worth to them twice over, and I will let them choose, at their leisure, whether they truly wish to press a claim that opens a debt they cannot begin to pay. Compassion will not hold a river. You are quite right, my lord, and I thank you for the lesson. But a woman who spent her childhood watching peasants starve in a famine year, while the road that should have fed them stood closed and barred, remembers exactly which forfeits were never collected and by whom. Your noble women do not remember. They were never once hungry. I was. That is what I bring to your border, Lord Vane. Not a soft heart at all. A long, cold, exact memory of every single debt this comfortable court was too well fed to bother collecting. Kaelin sat back down very slowly, like a man lowering himself so as not to spill something precious. Vane said nothing at all. There was nothing left for him to say. And down at the far end of the long table, Seraphine, silver and lovely and correct in every fold of her gown, looked at Elira for a long, long moment, with an expression that Elira had not seen on her before, and it was not hatred, and it was somehow worse than hatred, and it took Elira a moment to name it. It was recalculation. Seraphine had told her, plainly and to her face, that she could not run a court. She had told her that because she truly believed it, believed it the way she believed the sun rose, and she had just watched a water carrier take the deadliest man in the North's very best stroke out of the air and turn it, in front of everyone, into a weapon aimed back at his own throat. And Elira saw the noblewoman understand, the way Elira herself had understood the poison, all at once and slightly too late, that she had badly misjudged the thing sitting at the king's right hand. That gratitude might indeed thin, as she had promised, but that this was not gratitude. This was a mind, honed to a razor's edge on 20 years of pure survival, that had just been handed a whole kingdom to point itself at, and a mind like that does not thin with the season, it only gets sharper the longer it is fed. Seraphine lifted her cup toward Elira, a very small distance, in silent acknowledgement. It was the first honest thing she had ever done in Elira's direction, and it was a kind of surrender, and it was also, though Elira could not have known it that night, the true beginning of the strangest alliance of her life. For Seraphine of the old northern lines was many things, some of them cruel, but she was not, in the end, a fool, and a woman who has waited her whole life for a crown, and then watched it go to another, can do one of two things with the rest of her days. She can spend them clawing bloody-fingered at the back of the woman who took it, until she is at last cut down for the trouble, or she can decide, coldly and clearly, that the woman who took it is worth serving after all, and make herself indispensable to the new order instead of dying under the wheels of it. Seraphine, to her eternal credit, and to Elira's eventual salvation, chose the second course, but that came a little later, and Elira is getting ahead of the story. She came to the Luna's rooms 2 nights after the feast, again unannounced, again alone, and this time she did not sit like a woman who owned the chair. She stood just inside the door. "I have spent my whole life," Seraphine said, without any greeting, "learning the things you needed and did not have, the names, the bloodlines, which fork, and which lord, and which word will start a war, and which will end one. I was raised to be a Luna, and I will never be one now. That door closed the night you climbed the tower, and I have wept over it, and I am done weeping. So," she lifted her chin, "you have the king, and you have his wolf, and you have a mind that frightens me, which I did not expect to be able to say of a servant. But you do not have 20 years of a court's memory, and I do, and it is rotting in me now with no one to spend it on. I am offering it to you, not out of love, do not insult us both, but because I would rather my whole life meant something as your right hand than mean nothing at all as your rival. Teach me nothing, I will teach you everything, and in exchange you will let me matter. That is the whole of the bargain. Will you take it, water carrier, or is your pride as small as your birth?" And Elira, who understood better than anyone alive what it cost a proud, discarded creature to walk back into the room that had discarded it and offer to be useful, rose from her chair and crossed the room and took the noblewoman's cold hand in both of hers, the way Kaelin had once taken hers, and said, "I'll take it. And I'll never call you my rival again. You will be the sharpest thing I own, Seraphine, after my own 2 hands. Sit down by the fire. We have a border to hold at the thaw, and I mean for the 2 of us to hold it so well that Vane chokes on it." For the first time since Elira had known her, Seraphine smiled a smile with nothing sharpened behind it, and she sat down by the fire, and that was the night the 2 women who were supposed to destroy each other became, instead, the thing the court had never once counted on, allies. But before the fire had burned low that same evening, after Seraphine had gone, Kaelin came to Elira's rooms. He did not say clever things about the feast. He came and stood in front of her chair, this mountain of a man, and he looked down at her for a long time in the firelight, and then he went down on one knee, not the great public kneeling of the hall, that came later, but just quietly, in the warm dark, so that his burning golden eyes were level with hers, and he said, "You didn't need me. In the hall, I moved to shield you, and you put your hand on my arm and you stopped me, and you didn't need me, you were never once going to need me, you had already read every treaty in that archive by candlelight while I slept. Do you know what that is, to me? Do you know what you did to me at that table?" He shook his dark head slowly, wondering. "I have spent my whole life being needed, and being feared, and being obeyed. No one has ever once simply matched me, stood level with me, taken the killing stroke out of the air and thrown it back sharper than it came. The wolf said mine that first night, and I thought it meant I had found something small and precious to protect and to keep. I was wrong. It meant I had found the one thing in the whole world I will never have to protect, because it can protect itself, and me, and the entire mountain besides. That is rarer than anything I own. That is the thing I did not even know I was starving for. Not someone to keep behind me, someone to stand beside me. And the great feared king of the Lycans took Elira's scarred water carrier's hand and pressed his rough bearded cheek to the back of it, and she felt the wetness of it on her skin, and understood that he was weeping, silently, the way a man weeps who was beaten as a boy for the crime of weeping. And she did the thing he had taught her by the fire on the night of her mother. She did not let him turn his face away and hide it. She reached down and held his jaw in her hand where she could see all of it. She witnessed it, and neither of them said the word that was standing plainly in the room with them. Not yet, not that night, but they both knew its name now, and they both knew that the other knew. On the 6th day after the feast, when at last he could climb the tower stairs again without leaning on the wall and pretending that he was not, the king did the thing he had promised in the dark of the first night, the thing Elira had never truly believed he would remember. He had Torv carry up the great debt ledger from the steward's counting room, the heavy iron-cornered book that held the bound life of every servant in Val Keep, and he found the page with Elira's name upon it, and her dead father's name, and the 80 crowns that had eaten her whole life, and he tore the page out with his own 2 hands, slowly, so that she could see him do it, and he fed it into the tower fire, while she watched it curl and blacken, and he said, "There. You are no one's debt now, Elira. Not the court's, not mine, not any man's. Whatever else you decide to be in this life, from this hour you decide it free." She should have been overjoyed. Instead she wept, and she could not have told him why, and he did not ask her to explain it. He only sat with her by the fire while she cried out 20 years of a weight she had carried so long that she had forgotten it was a weight at all, that she had come to think of it as simply the shape of her own shoulders. And he did not touch her, and he did not speak a word, and that restraint from a man built like a landslide was its own kind of tenderness, the deepest kind, the kind that waits and does not take. But burning a ledger makes a mortal enemy of the man who keeps it. Steward Merrick came to her on the 7th day. He was clever, and he chose his ground with a clerk's care. He caught her alone on the servants' stair, the narrow back stair by the kitchens, the one place left in all the keep where Elira was still only a servant, and not the king's miracle, where the old rules still held and no guard of Torv's would think to look. He was all oil and soft courtesy, a lean gray man with a clerk's pale soft hands, and a killer's patient unhurried eyes, and he told her, smiling gently, that she was a clever girl, and that clever girls above all others knew when a good thing had run its natural course, and it was time to be gone. He told her that the king's gratitude was a fever, exactly as Seraphine had, and that fevers, being fevers, always break. He told her that when it broke she would be a servant again with no ledger left to protect her. He had seen to that, had he not, and a very great many powerful enemies she had made simply by rising above her station, and that the wise course, the safe and sensible course, was to take a good heavy purse of silver, that he was fully prepared to press into her hand this very night, and be gone quietly down the mountain before the thaw, while she still had 2 whole legs to carry her. And he told her, still smiling that soft gray smile, that girls who did not take the wise course sometimes had accidents on cold stairs, and that stairs were such terribly dangerous places, were they not? And was it not a great mercy that the king himself had survived his own? Elira understood him perfectly. He had poisoned a king and very nearly gotten clean away with it, and she was the one loose thread left hanging out of the whole murder, and he was giving her a single chance to walk away down the mountain before he snipped it. She did not tell Kaelin. That is important, and she thought long afterward about why she had not. She could have run straight up to the tower and had Merrick in irons by nightfall, screaming for the king the way her whole heart wanted to. But she had no proof. A threat on a back stair is smoke, not fire, and smoke does not hang a steward, and she knew, with the cold, clear instinct of someone who has survived her whole life by watching powerful people and guessing right, that Merrick had not come to her alone in his mind. If she moved against him now with nothing but her own word and a servant's memory of a whispered threat, he would simply go careful. He would go quiet, he would smile and deny, and wait, patiently, the way he did everything, and then some later night, when the tower watch had relaxed and the keep had forgotten to be afraid, he would take not Elira but the king again, more quietly this time, more cleanly, and next time, There would be no shivering servant on the stair to smell the crushed almonds under the rot and find the poison. No, Elira did not want Merrick careful. She wanted Merrick confident. She wanted him certain that he had frightened her, that she was biddable and trembling, and already halfway packed and gone, so that he would keep his poisons where she might find them, and his plans where she might overhear them, unguarded, believing the one witness already fled. So she let him think he had frightened her. It was not hard, she was genuinely afraid, and she simply let it show instead of hiding it. She lowered her eyes and she let her hands tremble around nothing, and she told him, in a small voice, that she would think on his kind and generous offer, and she watched a slow satisfaction settle over his soft gray face like cream setting on milk, and she dropped him a servant's curtsy and went away up the stair, and she began, very quietly, from that hour, to hunt him. She had one great advantage, and it was the oldest advantage she owned, the advantage of the invisible. Merrick still thought of her as a servant, and servants are furniture. They are in every room in the keep and no one truly sees them there. For years Elira had moved through those halls entirely unseen, and now she took that old curse and turned it, deliberately, into a weapon. She carried water and coals and folded linen into rooms where great lords spoke freely of terrible things, because the girl with the ewer did not count as a listener, had never once counted, was no more a witness than the fire irons in the grate. She learned, listening at the edges of rooms she was invited to enter with a tray, that Merrick and Lord Vane met together in the counting room after the midnight bell had rung, when the keep slept and the fires burned low. She learned that the very healer who had given up on the dying king had somehow, in that same season of the king's near death, come into a fine new-built stone cottage down the mountain, and a daughter newly and richly dowered, paid for out of nowhere, and no one asking where. And she learned, on one night she never afterward forgot, kneeling in the cold black dark of the counting-room's storeroom, with her own heart slamming so loud in her ears that she was certain they must hear it through the wall, the whole terrible shape of the plot laid out in two men's confident murmurs. She learned that Redfell had been no ordinary battle at all, that the king had been lured there deliberately, drawn out to the pass on false word of a raid, so that a wound might be arranged for him in the confusion. An honest-looking wound, taken in an honest-looking fight, deep enough to carry the Silverthorn home under everyone's eyes. That the poison had gone into the wound not on the field, where an enemy might have done it, but afterward, inside the walls, over 4 careful nights, by the hand of a man Kaelin had trusted enough to let stand at his sickbed. And she learned the reason for the slowness of it, the patient cruelty of the method, the thing that turned Elira's blood to meltwater in that dark storeroom. The plan had never been merely to kill Kaelin. It had been to kill him slowly, over days, from a wound taken in open battle, so that his death would look like fate and not like murder, and so that the succession, by the ancient law of the North, would fall in the long grey days of the king's incapacity, not to any distant heir, but to the Lord Castellan who held the keep in a king's stead. To Vane, Merrick would keep the ledgers of a whole kingdom and grow fat on them, and Vane would put the iron crown of the Iron Mark on his own smooth head, and they had been 3 days and 1 shivering servant girl away from having all of it, the mountain and the passes and the pack, clean and lawful and unquestioned. Elira wrote it all down, every name, every date, the healer's bribe and his new cottage, the meeting after the midnight bell, the false raid at Redfell, all of it, in her careful patient servant's hand, on a folded page that she hid inside her dress against her own skin, where no one would think to look on a woman they did not truly see. And then she made a mistake, the only real mistake she made that whole long winter, and it very nearly cost her everything she had won. She went back for proof. A written page in a servant's hand was her word and no more. It would hang no one. But she had heard the 2 men speak of letters between Vane and the healer, letters that named the poison and the price, letters that would put both their heads on the block past any denying. And so she went back down into the counting room one night too many, alone, to find those letters, and Merrick was waiting for her in the dark, sitting quite still in the steward's chair with a candle unlit beside him, because Merrick was clever, and Merrick had at last noticed that the furniture in his rooms had begun to listen. Elira did not, in the years afterward, like to dwell on that part. He was not a strong man, Merrick, but he did not need to be strong. He had a thin, bright blade in his soft clerk's hand, and she had only an empty ewer, and he was between her and the one door, and there was no one within 3 floors of them awake to hear. He rose from the chair, and he was not smiling now, and he told her, in a flat, quiet voice with all the oil gone out of it, that he had given her a fair chance to be wise, and that she had chosen the cold stare after all, and that he was sorry for it, in the way that a man is sorry for weather. And Elira did the only thing left in the whole world for her to do. She screamed. Not for help. Help was 3 floors up and would come long after it was over. She screamed a name. She threw back her head in that black stone room, and she screamed Kaelin into the sleeping heart of the keep with every scrap of breath in her body. The same breath she had once poured down into his dying lungs in the tower, and she did not know, could not possibly have known, whether it would carry far enough or mean anything at all when it landed. It carried. She had been told how the whole pack heard him roar the night he woke from death. What she had not understood until that very night, until the moment her own scream left her, was that the thread ran both ways, that a claiming is a bond and a bond is a thread, and that a thread pulls at both of its ends, and that somewhere 3 floors up a sleeping king came awake between one breath and the next, with his mate's raw terror singing down the bond like a struck wire, wordless and unmistakable. And Kaelin Draven did not come down the 91 stairs. He came through them. He came through the counting room's outer wall in a shower of broken stone and mortar dust, with the change half upon him, more wolf than man, 7 feet of muscle and menace, exactly as the songs had always promised, his amber eyes blazing like twin forge fires in the dark, and his roar already filling the room before his feet had touched the floor. And Marek had one single instant to understand that he had made the very worst mistake a schemer can ever make in this world, that he had raised his hand to the one living thing that a killing cold king had decided to love, before the king of the Lycans had him by the throat and pinned him to the stone wall of his own counting room, with his soft clerk's feet kicking a full foot off the floor, and the thin bright blade clattering away useless into the dark. "She is mine," roared Kaelin Draven, and the whole keep shook to its roots with it, torches guttering in every hall, sleepers bolting upright 3 floors down, and this time Elira understood the word, all the way to the very ground of her, understood it in her bones and her blood, and the breath still heaving in her chest. And you put your hand toward her, you raised steel toward her, and for that alone I could end your line tonight, and salt the ground it grew from. But you will live, Marek, you will live. You will live to be judged in the open hall, in the daylight, in front of every single soul who watched you divide my death between you and call it grief. Because this one," and his blazing eyes came to Elira, where she stood shaking against the far wall, and even in the white heart of his fury they gentled. They always gentled for her. This one does not want a murder in the dark. She never has. She wants the truth told in the light where everyone must look at it. She is better than I am. She has been better than I am since the night she climbed a cold stair for a stranger. So you will have your trial, poisoner, and she will have her justice done properly and in the open, because she has taught me, in one short winter, the whole difference between a king and a wolf who merely happens to wear a crown. They were tried in the open hall 3 days later, in the hard, clean light of a winter morning, exactly as Elira had wanted it. Not in the dark, not with a quiet knife in a cell and a story told afterward. In the light, in front of the whole assembled keep, servants and lords standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, because Kaelin had commanded that the doors be thrown open and no soul turned away, so that everyone who had sat a death watch, and everyone who had carried a tray, and everyone who had smiled a knife smile, would have to stand and look at what had nearly been done to them all. Elira stood beside the king through the whole of it, not behind him, beside him, at his right hand, on the dais, where she had refused to stand the day she was made to sit at the feast, and where she now chose to stand of her own will. Kaelin would not have it any other way. When a steward of the court, seeing her come up onto the dais, murmured that it was not fitting for a servant to stand at judgment beside the king, Kaelin turned his amber eyes upon the man, and said only, "She is the reason there is a king to stand beside. She stands where she likes, in this hall, until the mountain falls." And the man said nothing more. It was Elira who read out the charges. She had asked to, and Kaelin had let her, and she stood in her plain grey dress. She had refused the borrowed gown for this. She would face them as what she was, and she unfolded the page she had carried against her skin, and she read it out in her clear, careful servant's voice into a hall so silent she could hear the torches breathe. Every name, every date, the false raid at Redfell that drew the king out to be wounded, The 4 Knights of Silverthorn worked into an open wound by a trusted hand, the healer's bribe, and his new stone cottage, and his newly dowered daughter, the meetings in the counting room after the midnight bell, the ancient law of succession that would have handed the whole north to the man who held the keep in a dying king's stead. She laid it all out plainly, one hard fact upon another, the way she had once laid a fire, and she watched the color drain out of Lord Vane's smooth face as she built it, log by log, into something that could not be put out. And then the healer broke. He was an old frightened man, and Elira had known he would be the weak joint in the whole iron chain, and she had asked Kaelin to have him brought and questioned first for exactly that reason. He looked at the king he had left to die, and he looked at the girl who had found the poison he had helped to hide, and he looked at Lord Vane standing cold and silent beside him, and something in the old man simply gave way. He fell to his knees on the stones and he confessed all of it, weeping, the whole rotten shape of it pouring out of him, the letters, the price, the vials, the knights, and he named Vane with his own trembling mouth, in front of the whole hall, past all denying and all lawyering, and the plot that had been built so patiently in the dark came apart all at once in the light, exactly as Elira had meant it to. No murder in the shadows, no smoke that a clever man could wave away, only fire, only the plain truth, spoken aloud where everyone had to hear it and no one could ever again pretend they had not. Lord Castellan Vane was given to the headsman before the sun had crossed the high window, and he went to it silent and grey, having run entirely out of mild words at last. Steward Merrick was cast down into the deep cells beneath the keep, there to keep a very different sort of ledger for the rest of his days. The bot healers were stripped of their place and cast out down the mountain into the winter, to make their own way to whatever waited for them below. And the keep that had left its own king to die, that had sat its cowardly death watch and changed no linens and climbed no stairs, learned in one hard bright morning exactly what it had so nearly done, and exactly who had climbed the 91 stairs to save it from itself. Elira watched the understanding move across all those faces along the walls, the noble faces and the servant faces alike, and she saw more than one of them, lords who had smiled their knives at her a fortnight past, drop their eyes to the floor and keep them there, unable to meet the gaze of a water carrier in a grey dress who had proven, past all argument, to be the only clean thing the whole poisoned house had held. When it was done, when the hall had emptied and the light had gone long and gold across the stones, Elira thought that it was finished, that the danger had passed and the story had reached its end, and she felt something in her go loose and cold and afraid, because she had lived, her whole life, in the shadow of a simple servant's law, which is that you are kept only so long as you are needed, and now the poison was drawn, and the plot was broken, and the king was well and strong and whole again, and there was nothing left in all the keep that needed saving, and Elira did not know, truly did not know, whether there was any longer a place in it for the woman who had done the saving. She spent that night alone in the dead Luna's rooms, and she did not sleep, and she waited, the way she had waited her whole life, for the good thing to be taken back. He did not come that night, and he did not come the next, and the fear in Elira grew until it filled the grand cold rooms from floor to rafter. She told herself she was being a fool. She told herself she knew better than the frightened servant girl voice that had kept her alive for 19 years. But the voice was old and it was strong, and it had never once been wrong before, and it said, over and over, in the dark, he is a king again now. The wound is healed, the knife is caught. He does not need his miracle any longer, and a king who took a water carrier to his hall while he was dying will remember, now that he is well, what a king is supposed to marry, and it is not you, it was never you, and the kindest thing he can do is let the winter thin it quietly, the way Seraphine always said it would. You have your rooms, you have your freedom, that was always going to be the whole of it. Be glad of it, do not reach for more and lose even that. It was Seraphine who found her on the third morning, grey-faced and hollow-eyed by a fire she had let go nearly out, and Seraphine who read the whole of it off her at a glance, because Seraphine had spent her life reading rooms, and Elira was, that morning, a very easy room to read. You think he's done with you, Seraphine said. She did not make it a question. She crossed the room and, with her own high-blooded hands, she knelt at the cold hearth and began, briskly, to build the fire back up. And the sight of the lord's daughter of the old northern lines on her knees at Elira's grate, coaxing flame from ash, was so strange and so unexpectedly kind, that it undid something in Elira that the trial had not touched. You've decided that now the danger's past, he'll come to his senses and marry a valley and a herd of spears. And you're sitting up here in the dark rehearsing how to survive it, aren't you? Because that is what your whole life has taught you to do. To feel the fall coming and get low before it lands. She sat back on her heels and looked up at Elira with those clear, cold eyes that had, somewhere in the last weeks, stopped being an enemy's. Listen to me, water carrier. Because I know this man better than you do in one particular way. I have watched him from the outside my whole life, wanting him, and you have only ever seen him from the inside, being wanted. And from the outside I am telling you a true thing. He has not stayed away these 3 days because he is done with you. He has stayed away because he is a coward about exactly one thing in all the world, and it is you, and he is downstairs right now driving Torv and every craftsman in this keep half mad, and he does not know that I have come to spoil the surprise, and I find that I do not care, because I would rather you did not grieve yourself gray over a thing that is not happening. He is not letting you go, Elira. He is trying to find a way large enough to keep you that will not insult you by being too small. Now put out that face, let me dress your hair, and when he sends for you, and he will send for you, today or tomorrow, do not go down those stairs braced for the fall, go down them ready to be caught. It is a different way to walk. I will show you. And Elira, who had never once in her life walked into a room ready to be caught, let the woman who was supposed to be her rival dress her hair and steady her hands and teach her, in an hour by a rebuilt fire, how to stop bracing. It was the hardest lesson of the whole winter, harder than the treaties, harder than the forks. It is the hardest lesson there is, for anyone who has been owned. But she learned it, a little, that morning, because Seraphine was patient, and because the fire was warm, and because some small stubborn part of her had begun, at last, to want to believe. The summons came at dusk. It was Torv who brought it, the old wolf, and he was grinning through his gray beard in a way Elira had never seen him grin, and he would tell her nothing at all, only that the king requested the Lady Elira's presence in the great hall, and that she was to come as she was, and that she was not to be afraid, and that if she was afraid anyway he would carry her down the 91 stairs himself, and there was no shame in it. And Elira laughed, shakily, and told him she would walk on her own 2 feet. Thank you. She had climbed them once already the hard way, and could manage them again, and she took Seraphine's arm, and she went down. The great hall was full. It was fuller than it had been for the trial, fuller than the feast, fuller than Elira had ever seen it. Every soul in Val Keep was crowded into it, and this time the servants were not pressed back against the walls but standing among the lords, mixed in with them, because the king had commanded it so. Halda the underbaker with flour still on her apron, and the wine boy with his bruised left hand, and the fish plater whose daughter's fever had at last broken, all of them there in the warm torchlight, all of them turned toward the doors as Elira came through them on Seraphine's arm in her plain gray dress. And a sound went through the crowd when she entered, a low, warm murmur, and it was not the sound she had braced for her whole life. It was welcome. The king of the Lycans stood at the far end of the hall, on the dais, in front of the great carved throne of the ironmark that his father had sat, and his father's father before him. He was dressed not for war and not for state, but plainly, in dark wool, his black hair and black beard washed and combed, his amber eyes fixed on the doors, on her, the moment she came through them, as though there were no other living soul in that crowded hall. And Elira walked the whole long length of it toward him, past every face that had once looked through her as though she were furniture, and now looked at her as though she were the only thing worth looking at, and her heart was going so hard she thought the whole hall must hear it, and she did not brace for the fall. She had promised Seraphine. She walked ready to be caught. When she reached the foot of the dais, Caelan Draven came down the steps to meet her, so that he stood not above her but level with her, on the same stones, and the whole hall held its breath. "Elira," he said, and his deep voice carried into every corner of that great room, and he did not lower it. He meant for all of them to hear every word. 3 days I have kept away from you, and I have made you afraid, and I am sorry for it. I stayed away because I was trying to build a thing worthy of the asking, and I found there was nothing in all my kingdom grand enough, and so in the end, I have come with nothing in my hands at all, which is fitting, because that is exactly how you came to me. You came up 91 stairs to a dying stranger, with nothing in your hands but your own breath, and you gave me that, the only thing you owned, and you asked me for nothing back. I have thought about that every hour since. I cannot get past it. A whole court that owed me everything left me to die to save themselves the climb, and a servant girl who owed me nothing at all climbed the stairs and breathed her own life into my mouth, and then, when I offered her the world for it, tried to give me back to the very people who had left me to rot, because she does not know how to leave a job half-finished. A low ripple of laughter moved through the hall, warm, and Elira felt her face heat, and Kaelin smiled at her, that rare true smile, and went on. The wolf claimed you the night you gave me my life. It roared one word at you out of the dark before I even knew your name, and it frightened you, and I have spent a whole winter learning that the wolf was only trying to say, in the one clumsy syllable it had, the thing that the man beneath it is too broken and too late taught to say in 1,000. So let me be the clumsy one now. Let me say it in the light, where you can see my face, and turn none of it away. And there, in the great hall of the Ironmark, in front of the whole assembled keep, the king of the Lycans, who had never once in his life knelt, to whom old Torv had knelt and the whole mountain bowed, who had held the northern passes against 3 invasions, and never bent his knee to any living thing, went down, slowly, deliberately, onto one knee, on the cold stones of his own hall, at the feet of a water carrier in a plain grey dress, and he took her scarred, chapped water carrier's hand in both of his enormous ones, as though it were the most valuable thing in the north, and a great gasp went up through the hall, because not one soul there had ever seen, or ever thought to see, the Ironmark king kneel. You found me at the bottom of everything, he said, and his voice was rough now, low, meant for her, though the whole hall strained to hear it, and you breathed fire back into me, and then, when I was too weak to save myself, you found the knife in my own house, when no one else in all this keep would even look for it, and you did every bit of it without once asking me for a single thing in return, which is the part I cannot get past, Elira, the part that undoes me still, that you would have climbed those stairs for anyone at all, that I merely had the astonishing, undeserved luck to be the man freezing at the top of them. I have burned your debt. I hold nothing over you. You are free, entirely and truly free, freer than any soul in this hall. And so I am asking you now, freely, as a man asks, and not as a king commands, with nothing in my hands, and my knee on the stone, and my whole court watching me do it. Stay. Not as my servant, not as my miracle to be thanked and set aside now that the danger's past. I know that is the fear. I have seen it in you these 3 days, and I am killing it here, in front of everyone, so that it can never grow again. Stay as my queen, my Luna, my mate, the one I choose the way you once chose to step back from an open, unlocked door. Marry me, Elira. Be the fire at the top of my stairs for the rest of both our lives, and let me spend all of mine failing to deserve it. Elira looked down at the king of the Lycans kneeling on the stones of his own hall, holding her rough hand in both of his amber eyes turned up to hers with nothing guarded in them, nothing held back. Everything she had taught him to show now shone to the whole watching north. And she thought about 91 steps climbed in the dark for a little warmth, and a fire built in a cold hearth, and a locked door, and a word roared back from the far side of death. She thought about the first gray morning, when he had unlocked the door and told her to go, and she had not gone. And she thought about how she had stood in this very hall a fortnight ago, certain past all doubt that his gratitude would curdle, and turn, and she would be a dead again by the spring. She had never in her life been so glad to be wrong. Get up, she told the king of the Lycans, and her voice only shook a very little, and it carried, because she meant it to carry. She meant every soul in that hall to hear it. Get up, you great stubborn fool. You'll drink when it's cooled, and you'll rest when I tell you, and you'll never kneel to me again. Do you hear me? Not to me, not ever again after this. Because I did not breathe you back to life to spend it watching you on your knees. A laugh broke through the hall, wet and glad, and she felt her own tears come, and she did not turn them away. She let him see them, she let all of them see them. And yes, you impossible man. I'll stay, I'll marry you. I chose to stay in your tower the very first morning, when the door stood open, and I could have run, and I have gone on choosing it every single day since, and I am tired to my bones of pretending it was ever about a job half finished. It was never the job, it was you. It has been you since the night you called me a stubborn thing and would not die. Now get up off those cold stones and kiss me before I lose my nerve entirely in front of your whole court." And he rose like a tide coming in, exactly as he had risen that first night in the tower, all that enormous strength gathering upward in one smooth, unstoppable motion. But gently, so gently, the way the whole winter had taught him to be gentle, and he took her face in his two enormous, careful hands, as though she were the only fire in all the cold world, and the king of the Lycans kissed the servant who had given him the kiss of life, there in the open hall, in the light, in front of every last soul in the mountain. And the whole pack of the Ironmark threw back their heads and howled. It began with Torv, the old grey wolf, one long note torn up out of him toward the rafters, and it was caught up at once by the guards along the walls, and then by the lords, and then by the servants among them, 100 voices and more rising all together through the stone, not in mourning this time as they had risen the night their king lay dying, but in joy, wild and rolling and unashamed, the sound climbing up through the tower and out through the high windows and over the whole white winter mountain, so that the wolves in the silver forest far below lifted their own voices to answer it, and the night rang from the throne room to the tree line, with the single glad song of a pack that had come back to life. And Elira stood in the middle of all of it, wrapped in the arms of the man she had refused to let die, her breath in his lungs and his heart beating strong and whole beneath the hand she pressed to his chest, and she was, at last, after 19 years of being no one, and nowhere, and no one's, all the way home. They were mated under the full moon, at the turning of the winter, on the broad flat stone of the tower's shoulder where he had first taken her to hear the pack sing, because Elira would not be wed in the great hall where so much cold had been done, and Calin, who by then would have pulled the moon itself down the mountain if she had asked for it, agreed at once. The whole pack climbed the 91 stairs that night, every soul who could walk them, and they stood in a great ring under the enormous white moon with the silver forest falling away below and their breath smoking together in the cold. And Torv spoke the old words over the two of them in the tongue of the north, the binding words that no king of the Ironmark had spoken for love in living memory. Elira wore no borrowed gown. She had refused the fine ones to the end, and instead the women of the keep had made her a new one, plain and warm and hers, and Halda the underbaker had baked the mating bread with her own 3-cut cross scored deep across the top of every loaf, and Seraphine stood at Elira's right hand where a sister would stand, silver and steady, holding the ribbons, having spent a week teaching Elira every gesture of the old ceremony, so that no lord in the ring could say the new Luna did not know the ways. And when the moment came, when the words were spoken and the moon stood high and white overhead, Calin bent his great head and set his mark upon her, gently, at the curve of her throat where the bond ran nearest the skin, and Elira felt the thread between them draw tight and warm and permanent, felt it settle into her like a second heartbeat laid alongside her own, and she understood that whatever came for them in the years ahead, she would never again have to feel it coming alone. He whispered it against her skin, low, only for her, in the middle of the pack's rising howl. Mine. But it was a different word now than the one he had roared from the far side of death in the dark. That word had been a drowning thing grabbing a rope. This one was a man who had learned, slowly and clumsily and completely, exactly what he was holding, and had decided, in the full light of knowing, to hold it forever and gently. And Elira set her own mouth against his jaw, and gave him the answer she had been too frightened to give the whole long winter. The word he had never once demanded, and had only ever waited for. "Yours," she said, "and you're mine, you great stubborn fool. Try to die on me again, and see what happens." He laughed, and the pack howled, and the moon shone down on the roof of the world, and that was the true wedding, the one the songs would never quite manage to tell, because the songs always want the servant raised to a queen, and the hall weeping for joy. And they leave out the smaller and the truer thing, two people who had both been taught young that showing what you feel is how you get hurt, standing under a cold moon, choosing anyway, out loud, in front of everyone, to be seen. The years were good to them, in the main, as good as years ever are to anyone. There were hard winters and harder harvests, and there were treaties to hold and lords to break and a border to keep, and Elira held it and broke them and kept it, with Seraphine's long memory at her right hand, and Torv's old strength at her back, and the whole living machine of the keep laid open before her eyes, the way no noble-born Luna's eyes could ever have laid it. The Vashael envoys came at the thaw, exactly as Vane had promised they would, and they sat in the great hall and tested the king's new Luna with the old law. And Elira welcomed them warmly and laid 3 famine winters of unpaid forfeit on the table beside their demand, precisely as she had said she would. And they did not press their claim, and the north kept its river and collected its grain, and no peasant starved behind a closed road while Elira held the keep. She did not forget the hungry. She had been one of them. She never let the court forget them either, and in time the court stopped needing to be reminded, which is the slowest and the truest kind of change there is. She freed the bondservants, all of them, in the first spring, burned the great iron-cornered ledger in the courtyard, where the whole keep could watch it burn, page by page, every debt in it, the way Kaelin had burned her own. Some of them stayed on for wages, and some of them went down the mountain to lives of their own, and Elira sent silver after everyone who left, because a king had once done that for her, and she had learned from it what it meant to be given a choice. Halda got the day oven, and then, in time, the whole bakery. Brenna, who had hated her, softened over the years into something like a grudging friend, and Elira let her, because being lifted up had taught her at last that there is no profit in hoarding an old smallness. And Seraphine of the old northern lines, who had come to destroy her, and stayed to serve her, became the sharpest and most trusted voice in the whole of the north, and never married, and never seemed to want to, and said once, late and by a fire, that she had gotten the better bargain in the end, that a crown would have been a lonely thing to hold, and a true friend was rarer, and she had traded down into the rarer thing without quite meaning to, and would not trade back for all the valleys and the mountains. And Kaelin Draven, the Ironmark king, the wolf who had never loved anything, learned to love, clumsily and completely and out loud, and he never fully lost the flinch, the old braced shoulders of a boy beaten for weeping, but he learned to let Elira reach across the space between them, and turn his face back toward her, and hold it where she could see it, every time, for the rest of both their lives. She witnessed all of it, he witnessed all of hers. That was the whole of the thing they had, in the end, when you stripped away the crown and the wolf and the 91 stairs. 2 people who had learned young to hide, deciding every day, on purpose, to be seen by one another. It is not the grandest thing a story can be about, it is only the truest. They had told Elira that the man in the North Tower was already dead. It was the first lie she was ever told inside the walls of Val Keep, and breaking it, climbing the stair, building the fire, breathing her own stubborn living breath down into a cold stranger's lungs, turned out to be the truest thing she ever did, and the beginning of everything she ever came to have. She thought about it often, in the good years, standing at the high window of the tower with the pack singing in the forest below and a great warm hand resting on her shoulder. She thought about the girl she had been at the foot of those stairs, frozen and invisible, and owed to a ledger, who had climbed only for a little warmth and found a whole life waiting at the top of the dark. If you are ever told that someone is already lost, that it is too late, that the wise course and the safe course is to leave the dying to their dying, and think only of your own skin, she hoped you would remember a servant girl and 91 stairs. She hoped you would climb. You never know whose fire has only gone out and not gone cold. You never know who is waiting at the top of the stairs to open his eyes and roar one word and change your whole life, and be changed by yours. Elira knew. She had climbed, and he had been waiting. The end.